Mr. Morelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to continue to add my thanks to both of you and to the members of the committee for the extraordinary work that you are doing. You know, I'm a bit of a fan of old movies. And I think back to one of my favorite films is Gaslight, the 1944 version. Charles Boyer, tries to convince his wife, played by Ingrid Bergman, that she's insane. He dims the gas lights to make her think she's hallucinating. And that film gave rise to the term gaslighting, the act of making someone question their own reality. And I can't help but think that American citizens are victims of gaslighting, that we are literally questioning, many Americans are questioning the reality of what they witnessed with their own eyes in real time on January 6th. And I know that members have described the attack on the building, the attack on us as members of Congress, but although those are obviously very important, it was more an attack literally on the Constitution of the United States and the Republic that helps define it. And not only are we asking Americans, some of us asking Americans to ignore what they saw, but as my colleagues have pointed out, the contemporary accounts of people who experienced the events, who wrote text messages, who in the days following condemned what had happened, and yet today seem to have had this amnesia about what had happened, or now frame it in ways that are completely divergent from what they did in their accounts in the days and the hours and days that followed the attack. And I agree also with my colleagues. I think these are the darkest days America has faced, and that our republic is in grave danger, and the work that you're doing will hopefully, I pray, help save this republic. I also want to say, this is completely a digression, and this is Joe Morelle's opinion. I don't know that anybody's written about it. I find it highly inappropriate that a White House chief of staff would publish a tell-all book within 10 months of leaving office, just as a complete aside. I find that so indecent and without honor that it makes me question so many things about what we do. And I would hope there's no precedent for that in the future. But it is, however, insightful in many ways and what was going on at the time. So maybe while I find it indecent that you would do it for financial gain, it does give us a window on what happened. And I also find it mystifying that Mr. Meadows would tell all in a way to gain financially for himself, but isn't prepared to testify in front of Congress in order to save the country and the republic. But I wanted to go back, and I certainly don't in any way want to suggest that my good friend from Oklahoma meant this, but the notion of sort of bringing up the number of texts and documents that Mr. Meadows submitted to the committee does not obviate the need, and I think the vice chair said this, to come and testify. It's not as though in a criminal proceeding or a subpoena by Congress that people can individually just choose, well, I'll submit documents, and I'm not suggesting that the gentleman was suggesting this, but it would lead someone to question, is it necessary then for me to testify when I'm called? I mean, will just the submission of documents suffice? Is that, and I do think the vice chair answered this, so you can certainly feel free to comment further, but there's clearly questions that arise when you get the documents. You want, and I assume this is the whole point of asking someone to testify in any place where a subpoena is appropriate, to answer questions about the documents submitted. Is that not what the whole point of this is?
Well, I mean, absolutely, and for us to take those documents and develop the next line of questioning in person of that individual, of which Mr. Meadows failed to follow through.
And I assume, I haven't seen the documents in question, the texts and the emails and other documents, but I assume they have given rise to probably hundreds of additional questions where the members of the committee and the Congress and the American public should have the right to have the questions about those documents answered. And I don't know, Madam Vice Chair, if you want to comment on that.
Yes, absolutely, you're right, Mr. Morelle. And you also mentioned Mr. Meadows' book. As the committee described last night, there are many instances in Mr. Meadows' book where he talks about issues that are of great interest to us, including, for example, he recounts a conversation that he had with former President Trump right after the former president urged people to march to the Capitol and told people he would be with them in that march. And Mr. Meadows recounts his conversation after that. So, of course, details like that he is recounting in a book, but then refusing to answer questions before Congress about, there are legitimate questions that he is obligated to appear to provide responses, and failing to do so puts him in contempt.
And I do find, I continue to scratch my head about the notion you would author a book on the subject, sell it to the American public, and not be willing to testify to Congress about the comments you made in the book. It's really astonishing to me that we're here. And I also, my colleagues have raised this, it's almost as though, and I appreciate what people have said, and I don't want to engage in repeating this, but it's almost as though if you engage in treasonous activities in plain sight, and with many of your colleagues gathered around you to engage in that treasonous activity, it's almost as though you think that that's okay, that somehow doing it in plain sight somehow allows that to be an okay thing. And I suppose that the precedent that my colleagues have mentioned, that if a future president decides that he is going to be, or she is going to be protected by just invoking privilege, but engages in a pretty wide conspiracy against the United States government and by extension the people of the United States, that would somehow be okay. I mean, I guess you would avoid all accountability if you follow this to its logical conclusion, which I find honestly astonishing. And I'll repeat again, I think these are the darkest days, and I think that it bears repeating by all of us over and over again to our constituents and to the American public that this may be difficult. This may be, in some ways, just ugly to hear about, to see, to investigate, but it is vital. It goes to the foundation and the core of what we believe as Americans. So I want to, again, thank you for your work, your service to the country. I can think of nothing more important facing the Congress right now. With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ross.